Hi, my name's Alex and welcome to Retrospective. This is the first in what will hopefully become a series of game reviews in which I will give my opinions on titles from across the decades, and we're starting with none other than a game that defines insane, which goes against all the norms of gaming, such as style, theme and player interaction, and that is Suda51's absolutely manic Killer7. Killer7 is a game that I'd never played when it came out, and I'm sorta glad. I definitely wouldn't have understood what was going on when I was younger, and it still confuses me today, and we're talking about a game that had a separate book written to try and clear up the symbolism and meaning behind Suda51's otherwise crazy game. It honestly baffles me that this game was even made in the first place, because on the surface it looks like an incomplete mess, but you know what, it's been amazing every playthrough. Killer7 vastly distances itself from other games of the era because it boldly chooses to avoid all preconceived ideas about what a video game should feel like, look like, sound like, and ultimately play like. Nothing is usual, and at first it seems like a rushed development cycle led to an unfinished game, but after playing the game for a few hours, it becomes obvious that everything was done on purpose, to make the game refreshingly unique, and it helps emphasize the unnerving tone that the game has. On first playthrough, I found the game to be a mess that I didn't really understand mechanically, and that I thought was annoying or flat out poor design, but when I finished I was left wondering, longing for more, and even for an explanation as to why the game was designed the way it was. This was because I hadn't stumbled across a game that actively broke every convention of game design. However, upon my second playthrough, it became clear to me that the game was trying to be a piece of art with some story that was cooked up by Suda51 and that only he really understands, before being a game. Now I'm going to split this review into a few sections, and the first one will be the narrative. The narrative is one of the craziest pieces of writing I've ever experienced. From a humble start as an assassin tasked by somebody, in this case the leader of the Killer7, Harmon Smith, to take out a specific target. But as the game progresses, it becomes a game about a fictional political struggle between the USA and Japan that could lead to nuclear war, where the ghosts of previous targets come to give you an insight into world peace, including a guy that wears a tank top that says hustle while humping the air. It's also about a child who Harmon trained to be an assassin, and the war between two gods, Harmon and Kunlan, the game's main antagonist I suppose, and the collection and distributing of child organs, to a complete shift to an almost anime-like sequence where you battle the Super Sentai or Power Rangers in a one-off-one standoff that makes no sense, and this is only a small sample of Killer7's plot. It's all over the place, but the game's set pieces also match this, as one moment you'll be in the main apartment where you start before every mission, to an open door that leads into a vast living room with two people playing chess, to a theme park. The reason this is odd is because in Western civilization, for the most part, media has a start, a middle, and an end, with optional pro and epilogues. But Killer7 is a compilation of sorts that we're not used to, and we've been desensitized to difference through our exposure to the same structures within other medias, and Killer7 never gives the viewer a chance to become comfortable because of the contrast and drastic change in literally everything. The narrative isn't written in a way that clearly ties up all the loose ends either. In fact, the attempt it does make towards the end left me even more confused, and I would have preferred no explanation. It was difficult enough to try and follow the on-screen narrative without the game trying to throw curveballs into the mix to confuse me more. Now, the next section in this review will cover the mechanics within Killer7. In this section, I will state why I think Grasshopper Manufacter decided to develop these mechanics in such an odd fashion. The main mechanic of Killer7 is shooting, but not as many people would perceive it. As the game is mostly in third person, the player is required to press a button to enter first person mode when they hear the laugh of a heaven smile. The sort of zombie-like creatures that you'll be fighting for the most part. But as if that wasn't enough, the heaven smiles are invisible, so the player must press another button to scan them and make them visible and vulnerable to damage. Finally, they must snipe glowing weak spots on the enemies to kill them quickly, as they will slowly advance towards the player, and if they get too close, blow up, dealing damage. While hitting the weak spot doesn't seem like an essential mechanic, it quickly becomes one when more than one heaven smiler is on screen, as they have plenty of life and will suck up bullets. The main way shooting couldn't be considered good is that the recoil of every character is way too much for the precise aiming that's required, at least at the start of the game, but sufficient upgrades will reduce this to an at best okay degree. The tediousness of the shooting, needing to manually move into shooting mode, then having to scan enemies to then hit specific spots on them, slows down the mechanic, and because of this adds a sense of uniqueness that would otherwise go overlooked due to familiarity of sorts. Movement is another mechanic which is oddly developed because of one reason. It's on rails, with a single button that allows movement forwards and another that turns them around. What makes this strange is that the game has several branching paths that the player can choose from. Pairing both open paths and restricted movement creates a sort of juxtaposed exploration in which the player can, but also can't do a lot at the same time. But this also removes any idea about it being an exploration game, which forces the player to use a limited world masquerading as a slightly bigger one. You could view this choice as the developers trying to ensure that the player was on track throughout the game so that the flow of the level wasn't disrupted by them losing their way. But considering that most of the levels, at least I found, were designed in a maze-like structure anyway, or with areas that needed revisiting when the answer to a puzzle was discovered, which somewhat defeats the point of having the restricted movement. The puzzles within Killer7 are, for the most part, extremely easy and follow the same format, which goes find the object, find the other object, and use the first object to finish the puzzle. Pretty simple, and this would fail to stand up to other puzzle games such as Portal, which means that it can't be directly classified as a puzzle game. But were the puzzles the main focus of the game? They definitely seem like they were included to give the levels and bosses some depth, and on the bosses specifically to complement the sniping style of gameplay that the shooting imposes. But from what I can gather, the puzzles look like a quick way of adding padding rather than depth to the levels, because the linear movement would mean that the player could finish each level relatively quickly, as their paths would be guided, but adding puzzles forces the player to look for options and seek other solutions. You could view these choices on the mechanics as Suda51 trying to employ something called the distancing effect, to try to reach out to the player and break them out of their comfort zone within gaming, so that they are more deeply impacted by the end. I mentioned that I thought the game was annoying, yet I felt longing, and this was because I couldn't wait to find out what Killer7 had to offer next. I mean, we're talking about a game that throws literally anything it can at you to make you feel either uncomfortable or confused. These mechanical choices force the game into a genre purely of its own, as they remove more from each genre as they put in. It couldn't be classed as a shooting game because it's too slow and wouldn't fare well against more technical games of the genre. You couldn't say it was an exploration game because of the linear movement. You also couldn't call it a puzzle game because the puzzles seem like an afterthought and that weren't very involved. This forces the player into thinking into wider genres, such as, I suppose, something along the lines of a horror game, as it definitely has survival horror elements, but even this is a stretch, as the colour palette is too vibrant for it to be accurately called so, as it doesn't bestow fear into the player, and ammo is infinite, meaning that the player is never in a situation where they are running from enemies because of lack of defense. Overall, Killer7's radical changes, oddly designed mechanics and narrative definitely give a player an unexpected experience like no other. Because it's so different to anything I've played, it's given me a lasting impression that I doubt any game will be able to fill, which seems like the purpose. The game was designed more to shock the player out of their gaming routine, and it almost seems like it's saying, look at me, I'm a piece of art. While the true answer may forever be hidden, from the pieces gathered, it looks like Suda51 was trying to make a statement on gaming, but that message isn't entirely clear. Personally, I give Killer7 an 8 out of 10 and give it an essential rating. That's it for today's episode, I hope you enjoyed it, see you next time.